When I was 16, my mom took me camping in the mountains and left me there. I'm Emily. The night my childhood ended didn't look dramatic at first. Just cold air, smell of smoke, my mom shoving a multi-tool into my hand. Go grab some real firewood. Time for you to learn how to take care of yourself. I wandered off the trail. No signal, no flashlight. Just my phone at 20%. I was gone maybe 40 minutes. When I came back, I heard her voice near the tent. If she wants to survive, she'll figure it out. Then I saw her. Tent half down, cooler in the SUV, everything packed. You're not actually leaving me here. She didn't laugh, just tossed my backpack at me. You say you're grown up? Prove it. The engine started. Headlights swung past my face. A minute later, I was standing alone in the dark. I thought that was the worst thing she could ever do. 6 years later, she walked into my job sobbing. And somehow, that hurt even more. If you've ever been abandoned by the person who was supposed to protect you, this is for you. When the sound of the car finally faded, the forest got so quiet it hurt. I stood there, clutching my backpack, like it might magically turn into a ride home if I squeezed hard enough. It did not. My phone said 15%, no bars, just that little SOS symbol mocking me. I tried to tell myself this was a twisted camping lesson, that they'd circle back once I learned my lesson. I waited an hour, then another. The sky went from blue to orange to deep purple. No headlights, no engine, no mom. Eventually, the cold pushed through my jacket, forced me to move. I checked what I actually had. 2 bottles of water, 3 granola bars, a thin hoodie, a cheap plastic poncho, the multi-tool, no map, no charger. I laughed. This sharp, ugly sound that bounced back at me from the trees. 16 years old, and my own mother had basically dropped me in the middle of the Rocky Mountains with the starter pack for a school field trip. I tried to retrace the way we'd driven in, following the dirt road toward the main campground. The problem? Every cluster of trees looked exactly the same in the dark. My phone flashlight made a weak little cone that barely reached 10 feet ahead. I kept thinking about all the true crime podcasts, all the last seen at a campsite episodes. After maybe an hour of walking, I forced myself to stop. If I kept wandering without a plan, I'd burn through my energy and get even more lost. So I did what I remembered from outdoor education class. Stay near a landmark. Stay visible. Conserve energy. I dragged some fallen branches into a rough circle, sat with my back against a thick tree, knees pulled up to my chest. The temperature dropped hard after sunset. My teeth started chattering. Every crack of a twig sounded like a bear. I didn't sleep that first night, just blacked out in tiny bursts, jerking awake at every sound. In those half-awake moments, I heard my mom's voice over and over. If she wants to survive, she'll figure it out. That sentence had been too calm, too measured, like she'd been rehearsing it for weeks. Morning came slow and gray. I forced myself to eat half a granola bar, take small sips of water. I knew dehydration would kill me faster than anything, but panic would make me chug everything if I let it. By the second night, the fear felt different, less like a jump scare, more like a heavy coat that wouldn't come off. I stopped expecting my parents' headlights. I stopped imagining this ending with a lecture and a ride home. I started admitting the one thing I didn't want to say out loud. They really left me on purpose. On the third day, my legs shook every time I stood up. My lips were cracked. I had 1 bottle of water left, half a bar. My phone was a dead rectangle in my pocket. I followed a narrow trail along a stream, mostly because it was easier than pushing through brush. That's when I heard it. Voices. Real voices. Laughing. The clink of metal against rock. I froze, then forced myself to shout. My voice came out thin at first. I tried again, louder. Help! The voices went quiet. Then a man's voice called back, sharp, alert, asking where I was. I stepped out onto the trail, waving both arms. A group of 3 hikers stood ahead, loaded with real gear. Big packs, bright jackets, GPS clipped to their straps. They looked at me like I was some kind of ghost. I must have looked like one. Dirt on my face, hair matted, eyes wide. One of them rushed over, put a hand on my shoulder, asking if I was hurt, if I was alone. That was the moment it hit me how bad it really was. I opened my mouth to answer, but all that came out was this broken little sound. Another hiker handed me a protein bar and a foil blanket. While I ate, they called in my situation on a radio to park rangers, using words like minor, abandoned, possible neglect. Hearing those words made something inside me sit up. Neglect. Abandoned. It was the first time anyone had labeled what happened as something other than discipline. When the rangers arrived, they asked me careful questions. Where were my parents? When did I last see them? Did they know I was out here? I told them everything. The firewood, the quote, the car driving away. One ranger's jaw tightened. He looked at his partner, then back at me. Did they file a missing person report? I blinked. I don't know. He radioed something to someone else. The answer came back a few minutes later. No report, nothing filed, no one looking for me. My parents had gone home and never told anyone I was missing. They drove me to a ranger station, gave me hot chocolate, a warm blanket, a phone to call someone. I called my aunt, not my parents. She answered on the 3rd ring. Emily? Aunt Linda, I said, my voice cracked. Can you come get me? Long pause. Where are you? Where's your mother? I don't know. She left me in the mountains 3 days ago. I heard her suck in a breath. She what? An hour later, she was there, red-faced, furious. She hugged me so hard I couldn't breathe. Then she turned to the rangers and asked what kind of charges could be filed. The ranger looked at me. That's up to her. I was 16, exhausted, traumatized. I didn't press charges that day. I just wanted to sleep somewhere safe. But I never went back to my mom's house. I stayed with my aunt, finished high school, moved to Seattle for college. For years, I barely spoke about what happened. My mom would call sometimes, leave voicemails. You're being dramatic. It was a lesson. You're fine now, aren't you? I ignored her. Built a life. Got a job at a coffee shop. Started therapy. Then one day, 6 years after the mountain, she walked into my work. I was wiping down tables, looked up, And there she was, crying, mascara running, making a scene. "Emily, please, we need to talk. I need you." My manager stepped forward. "Ma'am, if she doesn't want to talk to you, you need to leave." "I'm her mother." "I don't care. She's shaking. Leave." After she was escorted out, I sat in the back room, hands trembling. That night, she emailed me. Long paragraphs about how she'd lost her job, her apartment, how she needed money, how I owed her, because she'd raised me, fed me, and taught me to be strong. I stared at that email for a long time. Then I did something I'd been too scared to do for 6 years. I opened Reddit, created a throwaway account, and I told the story. I talked about the quote, the abandoned campsite, the 3 days alone, the fact that no missing person report was ever filed. I didn't use names, just enough context to paint the picture. Within hours, the responses poured in. "This is abuse. You should press charges." "I'm so sorry. My parent did something similar." People shared their own horror stories. A few said it sounded criminal. One comment hit me hard. "Abusers count on your silence. They taught you to protect them, not yourself." I realized that was exactly what I'd been doing. The next step scared me more. One afternoon, I opened TikTok, propped my phone against a stack of books, stared at my own face in the camera. Then I started talking. When I was 16, my mom took me camping in the Rockies and left me there alone. I told the story in pieces, no names, no identifying details, just the facts and how it felt. I added text captions, put a random trending audio at low volume, hit post before I could overthink it. By the end of the week, it had over 400,000 views. The comments were a mix of outrage and heartbreak. "This is abuse." "I believe you." "My mom did something similar. I thought I was alone." For the first time, the story wasn't stuck in my throat. It was out there, breathing on its own. Then my aunt called, sounded frazzled. "I don't know what you posted, but your mother is losing it. Someone sent her a link to a video that sounds a lot like your trip." I searched my mom's name, found her easily. New city, same state. She had a small online shop, sold homemade goods and wellness products. Every caption was inspirational. "Family is everything. Never give up on your kids." Little knives twisted into my ribs with every scroll. I didn't need to invent anything. All I had to do was tell the truth. I made a second TikTok, talking about how some abusers spin themselves into inspiring figures. Again, no names, just the pattern. Then I went to the review pages for her business. I didn't dox her, didn't link my videos, didn't tell people to harass her. All I did was leave one careful, honest review. I gave 3 stars, wrote that the products had arrived, but the person behind the business had a history of severe emotional abuse and neglect, including abandoning her own child on a camping trip as discipline, and never reporting them missing. I said customers deserve to know the character of the person they're supporting. For a few days, nothing obvious happened. Then, little ripples started. A former coworker found my TikTok, commented that my story sounded way too familiar. A distant cousin messaged privately, said they'd always suspected something worse had happened. My mom made a video of her own, crying about online bullies and cancel culture. But she slipped. She repeated the quote, "If she wants to survive, she'll figure it out." People in her comments froze on that sentence. You could see the replies shift from, "You're a great mom," to, "Wait, what?" and "You did what?" Her follower count dipped. Customers began asking public questions. "Did you really leave a teenager alone in the mountains?" New reviews popped up. "I can't support someone who admits to abusing their own child and calls it tough love." The more she tried to argue, the less control she had. That's the thing about the internet. Sometimes it's the only place where people like my mom can't completely rewrite history. Watching it all unfold, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something colder, steadier. For the first time, I wasn't outnumbered. For the first time, when she lied, there were thousands of people ready to ask the questions I'd been screaming into a void for years. The consequences came in waves. Comments under her posts, customers filing complaints, small claims court over undelivered orders. Eventually, she lost one of the cases, had to refund money she didn't have. Her landlord gave her notice. Then my aunt called with the update I'd been expecting and dreading. My mom had what the ER called a mental health crisis. They admitted her to a psychiatric ward after she hinted that maybe everyone would be better off without her. When my aunt said hospital and psychiatric, I sat down on the edge of my bed. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just felt this hollow, echoing quiet inside my chest. This was what I'd wanted, right? Consequences. For her to finally feel even a fraction of the fear she'd handed me on that mountain. But hearing she'd actually broken scared me in a way I hadn't prepared for. Weeks passed. I went to work, started attending a support group. Somewhere in there, my tech talks passed 1 million views. I didn't make more to chase it. I made follow-ups to answer questions from people still stuck in situations I'd escaped. I talked about safety plans, saving money quietly, therapy, legal aid, hotlines. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was information. Eventually, my aunt called, said the hospital had released my mom on a treatment plan, outpatient program, medication, therapy. My mom wanted to call me. I told my aunt I'd take one call, one time, on speaker with her in the room. No secrets, no rewrites. When the phone rang and I heard my mom's voice, it startled me how small she sounded. She apologized, really apologized. No but. No, if you hadn't. No, you know I meant well. She said she told her therapist everything. For the first time, had to listen to someone say child abuse without flinching it away. She cried, and I believed she was sorry. But believing someone is sorry and trusting them not to hurt you again are not the same thing. When she asked, "Can we start over?" I took a breath, told her the truth. I was glad she was getting help. I didn't wish her dead or miserable, but my life in Seattle, the one I'd built without her, was not a punishment. It was a boundary. Forgiveness, if it ever came, would be something I did for myself, not a prize she could win by saying the right words. There might never be a version of our relationship that looked like what she wanted, and she had to make peace with that in therapy, not in my inbox. She went quiet, then said, "I understand." in a way that told me she finally knew understanding and accepting were two different mountains to climb. We hung up. I didn't feel lighter or heavier. I just felt done. Here's what this story taught me. Tough love that leaves you alone and terrified isn't love at all. Love that demands your silence to protect its own reputation isn't love. It's control wrapped in a nicer outfit. This story taught me that some parents will call what they did to you a lesson, when really it was just cruelty they didn't want to be accountable for. And here's the hard truth. You don't owe protection to the people who failed to protect you. Telling your story isn't revenge. It's refusing to let their version be the only one that survives. The real lesson? You're allowed to name what happened to you. You're allowed to set boundaries that make other people uncomfortable. You're allowed to walk away from family if staying means slowly disappearing. So now I want to ask you, if someone who was supposed to protect you instead put you in danger and called it a lesson, what would you do? Would you stay quiet to keep the peace? Forgive them because they did their best? Or would you do what Emily did? Tell the truth publicly, even knowing it would cost them their reputation. Maybe you'd handle it differently. Press charges immediately. Cut contact without explanation. Seek therapy first before deciding. I really want to know. Because here's the deeper question. When does sharing your trauma stop being airing dirty laundry and start being self-defense? If your story has the power to warn others about someone dangerous, do you have a responsibility to tell it? Or is silence the safer choice when the person who hurt you might break under the weight of the truth? And here's the hardest one. If they finally apologize years later, after public consequences force them into therapy, do you owe them forgiveness? Or are you allowed to say, "I'm glad you're getting help," and still choose distance? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, because this isn't just about camping trips or mountains. It's about knowing when protecting someone else's image becomes betrayal of yourself. Let's discuss.